Hello, hello. We are live. Welcome to Chronic University number 3 of 2021. I am so excited that we are all here. And as everyone jumps on to the webinar, we can get started in a few. Today we're going to be talking all about the critical role of lobbying. We are going to pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about what lobbying really is, what it means, and how you can get involved and why it's really important for not only our healthcare policy, but policy overall. So really excited to dive into this conversation. And happy Thursday to everyone who's joining us. We're really happy that you're spending some time with us today. So I will start by giving a little introduction myself. I always forget I should introduce myself too. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tatiana. I am the Director of Patient Engagement for the Chronic Disease Coalition. I am our hostess for Chronic University. I'm also a chronic disease patient myself. I live with ulcerative colitis and psoriasis. So not only are these things really passion points for me, but personally affect me every single day. So that's why I love the job I do here. And I'm really excited to introduce all of our panelists today. Thank you all so much for spending time out of your busy days to be here and just, like I said, pull back the curtain a little bit. Like Brian mentioned in the chat, if you have questions along the way, please utilize our Q&A feature. We will be sure to answer your questions, and the more questions, the better. These panelists have a lot of really, really great information to share. So with that all being said, I'm going to pass it to Mary Kay, actually, to do a little introduction, and then we'll do roundtable introductions for all of our panelists.
Just a quick one. Wanted to thank everybody for coming. I'm Mary Kay Clunies-Ross. I'm the Executive Director of the Chronic Disease Coalition, and we are really excited to be making policymaking more accessible to you. And these folks are really on the ground day to day, impacting policies that affect all of our lives. So we are grateful for their work that they do every day on behalf of patients, and also for their time in opening the door to let the rest of us have our voices heard. So thanks to them, and thanks to you all for joining. We hope to empower you to take action as well. Talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you, Mary Kay. Could not agree more. Okay, I will pass it over to Kelly. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Goss. I am the Western Region Advocacy Director for Dialysis Patient Citizens, and we are a national nonprofit patient advocacy and education organization. I currently reside in Sacramento, California, state capital, and I cover 20 states, like the Western states for TPC. My background, I actually have been engaged in policy and advocacy throughout my career. I started working for members of Congress early on in my career, and thereafter I worked for a PR firm where I did policy engagement as well as grassroots and strategic communications around legislation and other policy issues. And then ultimately I ended up going to law school, where I continued in advocacy and in public interest work. I eventually worked for the State Attorney General's office, where I worked in the Executive Office of Consumer Affairs, doing sort of taking legalese and turning it into day-to-day campaigns to get out in front of issues that we saw as trouble spots to help protect consumers. And I also spent 4 years at the National ACLU office in Washington, D.C., working on a plethora of issues to protect people for their constitutional rights. I've been in the health sphere specifically for the last 5 years or so, and absolutely enjoy working in patient engagement. I've spent the majority of my career helping, particularly around issues that helping people who are underrepresented or have a difficult time advocating on their own to advocate their rights for them and with them. So it's a real pleasure to be able to work with patients and help move the needle so that they have a better quality of life. So thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you, Kelly. So excited to have you here. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tatiana. My name is Maria Garcia. I am a senior director with the State Government Affairs Division of Fresenius Medical Care. We are a kidney healthcare company. It is Fresenius. It's a mouthful, I know. Our primary focus is on individuals living with end-stage renal disease. And I've been in this position about 2.5 years, but I've been working within government affairs for almost 20. I really fell into working in government affairs through an internship I had at the state capitol. And the first time I walked into the state capitol, I didn't know what the House and the Senate really were. But once I got in, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the policy making and being able to see and being engaged firsthand in that for that high level ability to pass laws and influence that, and really knowing that it does have an impact on everyday lives. And so I spent about a decade in the Capitol working for different legislators before I moved into the private sector as a contract lobbyist, where I had a variety of different clients. And then I got picked up to what I call in-house government affairs, where I am now working directly with Fresenius to help represent them before the state legislatures within the Western region. And throughout my different positions, just, as Kelly had mentioned, my common motivating theme and factor and what I saw made the most influence were those individual stories that really make those high level policies real for state legislators who vote on them. So I'm really excited to be here today and help share some of that experience to help empower folks to really be there and educate our state legislators.
Yes, thank you. I want to say, if anyone can spell Fresenius, they get a prize of some sort. I don't know what it is, but it's a fun word to spell. Thank you, Maria. George.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is George Okulich, and I started sort of a small boutique contract lobby firm a little over 10 years ago. And as a contract lobbyist, I represent a variety of different clients in the healthcare sphere, like, the Pacific Northwest Bleeding Disorders and the American Heart Association, the Oregon Dental Association. But then I also represent a number of clients in totally different areas. So I represent fishing guides in Oregon. I represent the Northwest Textbook Depository. I do a bunch of animal law for the Oregon Humane Society. So it really does sort of all across the board. And I have both long-term clients and short-term clients. Most of my clients are on retainers for a few years, but other times I will get hired to do small little projects during a legislative session. I started sort of my career, right out of college. When I sort of moved, I was in DC for a short period of time, working up on the Hill for Congressman Dick Gephardt at the time, and then sort of moved home to Portland, where my parents lived. And I literally one day printed out my resume and headed down to the state capitol and walked it around, and was hired to be the Senate Democratic Majority Leader's legislative assistant. So just working on her legislation, and that state. I've advanced in my career. Certainly she has moved up in her career. I served on her staff for about 3 years, and then was promoted to do policy work for the Senate Democratic Caucus. I then left for a short period of time to go get a law degree at Willamette University, and was in the sort of practice of law for a very short period of time, but realized I loved making public policy, and that's really where my heart was. So I went to work for a larger lobby firm back in 2004, and did that for 6 years, again, sort of learning the profession. And then eventually in 2010 decided, hey, I've got a number of clients. There is, I want to be in the position of picking my clients and choosing the work I want to do. And I've been fortunate to be able to do that. So like I said, I've done that for the last 10 years and have really enjoyed working with clients. Be sort of a navigator of the legislative process here in Oregon, is to help people meet legislators, tell them how to lobby, how to testify, how to meet legislation in their districts. And it's just been an awarding experience for me. So good to be here.
Thank you so much, George. Yeah, I think it's really, really cool. We're going to really see this once we start diving into the questions, but our panelists have such a wide array of experiences within the lobbying field specifically. And so it's going to be really exciting to see all of these different perspectives and all of these different experiences really come together in this panel. So with that being said, I'm going to start diving into questions. And like I said in the beginning, as we go, anyone who is here with us watching, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can make sure and answer those. So one thing that I do want to say is I have some specific questions for our panelists, but for our panelists, I want all of you to feel free to chime in as I'm sure all of you can offer different perspectives to these questions. But just to begin, I would love to start, Maria, with you. And I'd love to hear from you what you really believe to be sort of the biggest misconception people have about lobbyists. And if you could go into a little bit about, what do you like about the work? Like, what does your role really entail? What does that really mean? And how can patients get involved in the process?
Absolutely. And, it's a great question because the misconception for lobbyists are many. And I had them when I first began, right? I think people who even know what the word lobbyist is really see a glamorous life or they think of, schmoozing with legislators. And some people even, the worst think the most critical have a misconception that lobbyists are non-trustworthy or they're out to do bad things and corrupt the state legislature. And that is so far from the truth and really what lobbyists do on a day-to-day. I laugh about the glamour part because while, you are able to see legislators in some very nice venues, you are there working, you're there and you're trying to, in those minutes, explain to a legislator why an issue is so important that they should take that extra time and really delve into it. And so, and that's really what I love the most about this position and the lobbying aspect of it. It really is a people's job, government affairs, right? And knowing what makes people tick, making sure they understand an issue and how it affects the people in their districts, the people they're there to represent. And a lobbyist's role is to be able to connect the dots for them. As a lobbyist who has exposure to those legislators, your critical job is to hook them into the issue so that they have more interest in knowing the deeper stories and they can have a connection and you connect them directly with patients in their district or spokespeople or leaders in their community, because the reality is at a committee hearing, you get all of 3 minutes to testify. And so being able to connect legislators with the real issues and the real people in their districts, I think, is one of the most important roles I saw for lobbyists.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I really like that you touched on the fact that some people, definitely me included, have this sort of vision of lobbyists being sort of these in these like glamorous situations and just really like schmoozing and being a little bit kind of they have like an evil plan behind them. And so I think the fact that you touched on that, it's really important because I know that I'm definitely not the only person that sort of had that conception in their brain. But really, what the role of a lobbyist is to really provide that critical information and be able to connect the dots in a lot of ways for legislators. I'm curious, and this is, I'd love for everyone to sort of chime in here, but what do you think it's hard, or why do you think it's hard for patients to get involved in the legislative process, specifically from the lobbyist perspective?
I'd start, and I'd love to hear from Kelly and George as well. But I think part of it is that misconception. People feel state legislators are just unapproachable, that they, are just of a different class and we can't communicate with them. And so I always tell folks, they're just people. You can talk to them normal. You don't even need a suit, And I think one of the other issues is time. People feel like you have to, spend a full, and you can't really get sucked into it, but really starting from the grassroots and just having that relationship, knowing the name of your local legislators is really a good start for folks, and not feeling like you have to do everything.
Yeah. Kelly, George, any thoughts you'd like to add?
No, I agree. I mean, I think, one of the things that I deal with here in Oregon is when I talk to patients and we talk about the legislature, they sort of naturally sort of think of these legislators as more as, sort of congressional members, right? And in Oregon, ours is a citizen legislature. So for every legislator, serving in office, this is their second time job. They make $24,000 a year. And, most of them come from a variety of different backgrounds. They could be, farmers or, small business people. We have the largest, our coastal member, one of the largest kite manufacturers in Oregon, so really are very much down to earth people. And I really try to say, let's spend time with them, outside the legislative process to get to know them. And I feel like if patients have that experience sort of in the interim, having a coffee, close to where they live, with a legislator, it's a much more approachable process than starting them, during a session and testifying. Because I think once they realize, hey, these are regular folks just like me, and, they're approachable, and, they care about my issues and they want to know about my issues, it makes sort of the session a lot easier. I think the other thing is, I think that people need to realize too, is that, again, legislators look to, the lobby and look to patients, for help as well. It goes sort of both ways, of to say, hey, I was at a town hall and somebody asked me a question about, hemophilia, and they can call me, and they can call patients, people they know in the district, and say, hey, I had somebody at one of my town halls ask me a question, and can you explain more? Can you provide information? And I think that's a nice service that we can offer legislators as well.
Yeah, I agree with both, everything that's been said so far. And I would just add, I think oftentimes people who are not as familiar with the legislative and or policy process really are sort of looking for a bit of a roadmap. And once you sort of, once you get in the car and start the car, driving becomes a little bit easier, right? And so I think that's where a lot of our organizations sort of come into play and help, particularly mine, because we do advocacy. We are a member-based organization made up of patients, work with our members and others to provide that roadmap and how to fit. And it's not just the legislative aspect itself, but what other means do you have opportunities to interact with those members, as George alluded to, like with town halls and other engagements that these policymakers are doing in outside of the State House or Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have sort of a follow-up question. It's a little bit tangentially related. I know we're going to dive into this a little bit more later, but just because it's top of mind for me, I'm guessing it might be top of mind for other people who are here watching. I'd love to hear from all of you. What are some really easy ways for patients to start to get involved? Let's say they're watching this and they're like, yeah, this sounds really great. I want to be the person that George can call when he gets a question from a legislator about hemophilia. But how do I know George? How do I get started in that process? What are some easy ways that patients who maybe don't know where to begin can start to begin to share their stories and really help in this process?
Again, I'm happy to start. Go ahead, George.
So I guess what I always start with is, I would encourage patients to sort of Google just the Oregon legislature, and there is a tab at the top of the website that basically says find my legislator, and I would assume that most states have sort of a similar sort of website, but that was a way that patients can enter their address, and it will, and their house and state senator will pop up, and then they'll know who represents them. And I think that's a first start. And then I encourage them to reach out to introduce themselves to those legislators. And a lot of legislators are very responsive to constituents to say, oh, I have a constituent calling me about an issue, or who wants to maybe just get to know me. You're a constituent, but you're also a voter. And so legislators are, concerned about that and want to be, acknowledge that and reach out. So I would say that's the first start, is figuring out who your legislator is, and then making that initial connection. And I think, again, the other way is certainly, we, from just putting the Pacific Northwest bleeding disorder hat on briefly, is we really encourage patients to reach out to the organization. Not only do we do advocacy, but we do a lot of other sort of trainings on how to infuse and kind of work with DCBS and the consumer departments and things like that. But kind of have a variety of ways of trying to get, have information for volunteers and sort of guides in terms of how can we help you. We can go with you to sit down. You can do it by yourself, but certainly use the organizations that you're connected with to help be a guide as well.
Yeah, that's great. Maria, Kelly, do you have any other thoughts?
I was just going to add on to what George said. I agree with everything and all of his steps. With the legislators, just to add on, if you're a bit nervous in picking up the phone or sending an email directly, all of the legislators I've been interactive with usually have, as George mentioned, their website link, but also kind of a newsletter or an email blast that you can ask to just sign up for. And as George mentioned, there are community events that happen regularly between town halls and community coffees, and just showing up to those in person and getting a feel for the legislator. It's one step removed from actually just calling and requesting a direct meeting. So that's definitely helpful. And all of those organizations that George mentioned, from the ones he represents to the Chronic Disease Coalition, are definitely wonderful resources as well, because there's a lot going on, and so they help filter through some of that and focus that information. So definitely encourage folks to sign up for organizations that they are aware of.
Yeah, and to that latter point, Maria, like my organization, for example, we represent patients with kidney disease, and so for our membership, we're a resource for any patient that's, or person for that matter, that's looking for information about kidney disease, and we have an entire website dedicated to educational resources and all sorts of free programming, including monthly webinars and patient support groups, similar to CDC. And so we're sort of a resource that also provides information about ongoing advocacy. So we can let you know what's going on in your state and with your members, where they stand on something, so that you can take action, and we will help guide you, through that process if you're interested in that as well.
That's awesome. Thank you all for talking a little bit more about that. So I want to switch gears a little bit, and I have a question for you, Kelly, and also George. I think you could probably weigh on this too, on this as well. But Kelly, you have a law degree, just like you, George. Do you have to be a lawyer to be a lobbyist? Is that common? Does that help? And how do you work with patients who aren't lawyers to help influence lawmaking?
Sure. Well,
big question.
No, you do not need to be a lawyer. So that's the first one. So there's no intimidating factor there. I do think it's quite common, particularly in Washington, D.C. at the federal level. It's very common. Many of the lawyers that I worked with there for a number of years are in fact engaged in policy and at the regulatory and or legislative level. But so it is a very common thing. I mean, after all, what is policy? It is lawmaking. So understanding the law is paramount, but anybody can do it. Policymaking is these are houses that are meant for the people to make laws for the people. So, and some of the smartest people I've met are not necessarily lawyers and do the work that we do. So, so no, you absolutely do not need to be a lawyer. I think it does provide you with a bit of a background in the real technical legalese of bill drafting and some of the other things to that nature, but that has no bearing on your ability to advocate for yourself and what it is you're looking to do to change the law or to create new law that will benefit you and a group of others.
Yeah.
Oh, just to weigh in as well. I absolutely agree with Kelly. You don't have to be a lawyer. I personally value my law degree, and it's been helpful for me over the years in reading legislation and developing public policy. But I always think, actually some of the people that have the biggest problem with the legislature are lawyers. And, like Kelly said, it's a people's house. Sometimes lawyers make very, very good arguments based on, one step after another step. And then, a legislator says, I don't know what you're talking about. And but they hear a patient story about, what it takes, the cost of drugs and, how it impacts their family. And so they say, I side with the patient over the lawyer. And I think, for sometimes lawyers can get very frustrated. Legislators are not judges. They, like I said, they are ordinary people who don't have law degrees. Very few have law degrees. And so, a lot of times those lawyerly arguments sometimes fail flat. So like I said, I appreciate it personally for myself, but, it's something that's not necessary. And if you want to be an advocate.
Yeah, that's really great to know. I think it makes a lot of sense. Something that I would love to talk a little bit about and just dive into a little bit more is what is a day in the legislature like during a legislative session? Like, what does that look like? I think a lot of us, like me, a lot of people watching probably, again, have maybe like an idea in our head that may or may not be accurate. So I'd love to hear from all of you. What does the day look like during a legislative session? Anyone can start if anyone has any perspectives to share.
Often hectic. I think actually one thing that's good for people to know, my organization, we do an annual Congressional Advocacy Day, which we just held earlier this week, actually for 2021. And one thing I think it's really important for people to understand is how busy legislative staff and the members are, just because they are meeting with numerous people throughout every day on a variety of topics. And so that's where I think it helps to, have a little bit of understanding about, brevity, get to your point, use real life examples. And I think particularly in patient advocacy as compared to other topics, it's really important to have the patients participate in the process, because it really, it reminds legislators and staff, those people that are engaged in that decision making, that there's real humans that are affected by the policy, not just a financial number or a means to how else you determine policy, because policy can sometimes be mundane in that sense. And so I think that's why it's all the more reason to have patients share their story and do so and say, this is how, not just let me tell you my story, but this is how I'm impacted by this law, and that would be bad or that would be good, and we need this because this would improve the quality of my life. And hopefully you can also tie it to better outcomes, all around in terms of like financial and whatnot. So
yeah, definitely agree with Kelly's description of chaotic, right? And definitely want to double down on the need for, or the appreciation I think folks should have in giving legislators some slack, because it's very easy to walk in out of context and you're there with your one issue that means everything in the world to you, and that legislator has a committee hearing going on and floor sessions going on, and their staff is trying to brief them, and they have 15-minute meetings back to back, all from, on different issues, from transportation to education to healthcare to taxes. And as George mentioned, these people aren't experts in all of these issues. They're just regular folks. And so it's really easy to walk into a legislative day or a legislative session period and feel very dissed, if you will, or very, like the legislator wasn't paying attention, they're distracted. They are. But to Kelly's point, it's even more important in those times to be present. And so they see your face, they understand this isn't just a piece of paper and a recommendation from a staff person. This issue is going to make a direct impact on the lives of folks that are here and those not represented. So despite all the chaos, be forgiving to legislators. They're being pulled in many different directions, but power through it and definitely make sure you're being heard during those important times.
Yeah, I look at my day as sort of like a solid day of 15 to 30-minute meetings. And, it starts first thing in the morning, and whether it be meeting with legislators or staff, or just, going through the lobby. I think one of the things that people don't realize too is in Oregon, I would say there's about 1,200 registered organizations. There's a little over middle 500 and some lobbyists. And a lot of the work we do is with them as well. And so I may have a 15-minute, 8 o'clock meeting with the legislator, followed by, a 30-minute meeting in the cafe with coffee with, 3 or 4 patient groups to talk about a piece of legislation, to then leave to, 9:15, 9:30 to go meet with another legislator or staff, back to, 3, 4, 5 meetings with other lobbyists just to sort of discuss strategies and things like that. I mean, a lot of these bills that we work on, don't just affect, individual groups or individual people. There are a lot of people involved, in particular with patient groups. We work a lot with hospitals. We work a lot with, the medical association. A number of physicians have their own groups, and, we work with the OHSU, the Oregon Health Science and Universities, who has, a number of clinics that they help. So, it's work with legislators, but also it's work with a lot of our colleagues and figure out who are they talking to, who should we talk to. I think it's helpful for just, patients to, again, sit in the cafe or upstairs in the rotunda and talk through, various issues and various bills that we're working on. So I think it's a real collective thing, just of not only just legislators and staff, but also other organizations. But that's sort of what my day is. And, like I said, and then I could go from, 2 or 3 healthcare meetings to all of a sudden be in a dog fighting discussion over with Oregon Humane Society. And that's the uniqueness of the contract lobby, is being able to go from issue to issue to issue.
You didn't mean that as a metaphor, did you, George? Literally dog fighting.
Literally.
I was going to add in, it's good if you enjoy coffee. I was like, drinking, like, because you do learn to drink. Let's grab a coffee real quick and do something on the day. And pocket snacks are great if you're on a marathon of meetings. But and the one other thing I would just add to it is if oftentimes you're meeting with at staff level, it's not always the legislature, and I think just to don't underestimate or undermine the value of that, because the reality is the staff person is often the person who really is monitoring the issue day to day, and then will brief their boss, the legislator themselves, at the right time. And so that staff meeting can be just as important, if not more important, than meeting with the member themselves. So always keep that in mind. And anybody you speak to within that office is an important person. So you just always remember that when you're representing yourself.
Kelly, that's so funny that you mentioned that, because on our last webinar, Advocacy 101, we had a lawmaker, and he talked about that very thing, and also made the point that a lot of staff people, their next thing is to get elected by that district.
Yeah.
And so if you come in as a lobbyist and you're rude to staff, the next thing you know, they might be a lawmaker, and that relationship is over. It's just over. So yes, it's always good to treat people like people and important people. And it is also serving of your clients to do so.
Yeah. And you also wouldn't be surprised, reality is particularly when you're looking at patients with chronic disease, there's so much overlap among comorbidities. So oftentimes that member or that staff member may have a chronic issue themselves, or certainly has a family member or a good friend. So there's so much, it's sort of that 6 degrees of stuff, like they will understand. You just have to kind of bring it to them. And so I think that's the other value of patients chiming in and sharing their stories and their information, and again, always come in with that ask and how exactly that policy would impact you.
And I will ask this question, then I will get out again. But mentioning comorbidities makes me think about the fact that lobbyists work so much together. And George sort of mentioned that too, working with other organizations. Can you talk about sort of that and why that's okay? Like, you're not just talking to lawmakers, you're talking to other groups. And what's that dynamic like? And how does that help patients?
Yeah, that's it's a great question, and certainly to me, I'll be really frank. So I work for a nonprofit where we have a relatively small staff, and I cover 20 states in policy, plus sort of have to monitor federal policy, just how it implicates the state policy. So I clearly can't be in 20 places at once, and be in the weeds and get to know every legislator in all the states. So I rely heavily on coalition partners, everybody else engaged. So I basically couldn't do my job without knowing George and the Marias in the world, because Maria and I happen to work together because we both work on kidney disease. Maria keeps me abreast of things going on from her end. Likewise, I can do it from my end. And then we rely on the George, the expertise to tell us a little bit more background as how we think, particularly as it relates to he's someone in his position is going to have a really good understanding of the member themselves and how that member might be swayed. Like this issue matters to this particular member more than this member. And so what's the best strategy to sort of try to move, imagine if policy is a fish trying to move upstream, what's the best way to navigate that? And so we are all sort of independent on one another, if you will. And I think so working in collaboration as what we call coalitions is absolutely paramount to the process, at least for me. So.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think it goes both ways for legislators as well. When they see, this issue is not just impacting patients with kidney disease, it's impacting those with, blood disorders and so much more, right? Or just doctors and business and, all of the issues when it's, there's power in numbers and so many things. And I think policy making is definitely one. So to show, and when it's in collaboration and it's a coordinated message, it's more powerful to a legislator because it's succinct, it's delivered together, versus everybody trying to trying to catch the legislator on their own with their, all of their different messaging points. It really does help information flow both ways.
Yeah.
George, do you have anything to add on this piece?
No, I think I guess what I would say is, people kind of hit on it, is this is sort of a relationship business, right? And it's people have relationships with their colleagues, and they have relationships with legislators and their staff. In Oregon, we have 90 legislators, and so because chronic disease impacts so many people in so many different ways, to be able to sit with a coalition and talk through legislators and strategy. There are legislators in Oregon we know have been personally impacted by bleeding disorders, but when we look over to psoriasis and some of the other diabetes and they go, oh, so-and-so legislator or so-and-so staff is dealing with this issue, and we can talk to them about this. And if we have a bill or a prescription drug bill, being able to sort of break up who's talking to who, and which patients are talking to which legislators, because they know they personally have a very close connection to that. It's sort of great to sort of work together as these kind of issues play out, people talking to specific people based on their own experiences.
Absolutely. I think that's so helpful. I do want to transition a little bit, and I want to ask George specifically about SB 560 in Oregon, which the CDC supported. I'd love to hear sort of your perspective on that example. You know, if a patient wants to testify, how do you help them get ready to do that? What does that really look like? And also, you know, in a state like Oregon where the legislature is part-time, what happens in the interim? So if you could speak to both of those things, I think that would be really, really awesome to hear.
Okay, so starting with Senate Bill 560 and sort of getting patients ready to testify. It's really sort of a two-part process, and I would say this last year was, as we all know, is different than any other session we've ever experienced. So I don't know if I should use that as an example of trying to testify remotely, which, like I said, all of us in the lobby struggled with as well. And so, but assuming this is sort of a, normal times, it's sort of walking a patient through kind of just the process of how to testify, how to sign up, how to limit their testimony to, X amount of time. I always offer to read and support them, in terms of like going over their testimony. But then I spend a lot of time too, just trying to, again, break down the sort of, the myth that, these are people who are way up on a pedestal, and frankly, they're just average folks like, all of us. And so they do care. They want to engage with you. They want to know what your story is. And so, be able to get up there and testify. And I think, a lot of times I feel like patients don't want to get into some of the details on the bill because they can be pretty detailed. But I think it's important to say, hey, this bill impacts me. This bill will, if it doesn't pass, we'll see our prescription drugs go up. And then again, being able to talk through exactly the costs of prescription drugs, those personal stories of, this year, this drug cost this, I already got a letter that next year this drug is going to cost more. What's that? How's that going to impact my family? How does that impact, the entire family budget in terms of there are cuts going to be made elsewhere? But I said, you don't have to know the details of accumulator policy and how, or what other states are doing. You're not expected to do that. You really just need to tell the story of how this will impact you moving forward. And so the other question, the interim. So basically, right after session, I think all legislators and I think the lobby and folks are exhausted and tired of seeing each other. So there's always a big break right after. It's like everybody go your separate directions. And I would say now things are sort of flipping. And, I was during a session, I'm kind of banging on their doors trying to find them. And now they're trying to find me and they want to talk and talk about how things went in session. And so starting to have some of those conversations, we'll do a lot, like I kind of mentioned before, is I'm setting up meetings right now with legislators and clients to sort of say, hey, let's spend an hour, let's talk through session, let's talk, the February session in Oregon is 35 days. It'll be here sooner than we think. And so we'll be having those, sort of conversations. So it's just sort of longer meetings. I do travel a little bit, try to go to legislator districts, head down to head around the state a little bit, get to know them in their districts. It's also a time where we see a lot of candidates filing for office. So there's a lot of new people who want to be legislators. And I think there's a natural, about a third of the body that turns over every year. So you have a lot of people retiring, you have new people coming into those who want to run for those seats. So, I meet them. And again, it's sort of starting that relationship process of, here's who I represent, like I said, bringing in some clients to meet people and they're, we're running for office for next November. And so, again, sort of starting that process of relationship building in the interim.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And something I wanted to just point out about what you said, specifically around, patient testimony. The fact that patients, aren't expected to be experts, on the bill or all of the details, and that really their role is to talk about how, their life is going to be impacted, or just personal stories of their everyday life. So I'd love to open it up just on that note in general to everyone. I'd love to hear if any of you have had times or examples when a patient testimony really impacted a bill, changed a bill. Some of a little bit more like tangible examples of really what George was talking about when he was sharing that piece. Anyone can start.
I can start with an example. I
Okay.
have, when I was actually working as a staff person in the state capitol building, where it was actually referenced as a possibility earlier in our conversation, where I had a legislator, we were going over a bill, and as staff, I prepared the analysis, as Kelly previously mentioned, right? Staff take the time to do all of the research the legislator doesn't have to do, and we try to summarize it. And the legislator remembered meeting a person from his district that this bill would have impacted, and it was related to cancer. It was a cancer patient, and they were trying to change some of the treatment schedules, and I can't really remember the details, but I just remember so vividly the legislator saying, "You know what? I know this issue, and it's going to directly impact somebody. Can we find out how to get in hold of that person?" And we did, and within a day, we were able to track down that person went to a town hall and luckily signed their name in with their phone number, and it resulted in a direct communication, and the legislator based his vote on that feedback he got, in addition to everything else. But I think it really was that conversation he had going into that committee hearing, and it was a relationship that I think still continues today between that legislator and the patient, being available and open to talking to somebody about the issue. It was just a great experience, and I continue to talk about that today.
Yeah, and I would just say, over the years, I've seen numerous times where patients, obviously we encourage patients to submit letters that will be entered into the hearing record as well, will be on file with the legislative committee. But also when people testify in front of the legislative committee, and really it provides, when it's an opportunity that provides clarity to members that just don't truly understand the issue. Often a lot of disease issues are really, complex policy issues. And once they sort of understand better from hearing from the patient experience, then it's sort of open, you kind of see their aha moment where it just really opens their sort of thinking, and they become a little bit more open-minded about the impacts and which way to go. So you do see it. I see it all the time. I still learn from patients every day, because, patients all have their own journey and their own experience. And so there's no one size fits all, right? And so I continue to learn from patients, and it's that continual learning that I engage in myself that sort of then helps motivate me to do my job, to get the best outcome for them, to help improve their quality of life. So I think it works both ways, like much of what we've said, it goes back and forth.
Yeah, I think, one of the, I'm trying to think of an example. I remember there was a diabetic patient who came in and said, "Hey, last year I was paying, here's my copy of my bill from Walgreens, and I was paying X amount of money for insulin. And then, I went in to get my insulin refilled the other day, and then they charged me this, and I have the receipt from here. So I don't know what changed. I mean, I'm still diabetic. I'm still taking the same medication, but now I'm getting less meds for 4 or 5 times the amount of money." And they had copies of this, like I said, this Walgreens, sort of printout, and they said, "You can go to your Walgreens, your CVS, and just ask them." And I asked them, print that stuff out. And I took it to a legislator to say, despite what insurers are saying, or despite what everybody else is saying, this is how it impacts me. And it's and this is the proof that we have to say it. So I recommend to patients, like, if you have examples like that of, like, you are paying more, like, bring those receipts in. If you have that letter from the insurer that says, oh, we're no longer going to cover your drug, keep that letter. Those are things that it's just real life examples you can show legislators to say, no, this is happening. And despite, what they say, this is what happened. And I think those clearly cut through a lot of arguments on the other side.
Absolutely, George. Completely agree with you. And in addition to finances, as you mentioned, any impact that a patient would have because of a policy, access to treatment and transportation challenges that patients have, I think legislators also often don't really understand until somebody comes and says, look, I have to travel 2 hours a day, 3 times a week to go to treatment, and whatever you're going to do is going to result in a worse commute, or any of those issues are definitely better heard when they're directly coming from somebody who's experiencing it, for sure.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point, Maria, because oftentimes a legislator who's not, intimately familiar with a patient's experience won't even think of transportation as directly related to a healthcare expense. But if you can't get yourself to and from, your doctor's visits and your treatment, that is a huge aspect of it. And so being able to tangibly relate that back is, again, it's that eye opener for the legislator, like, oh, there's a lot more cost that typically the patient bears.
Yeah, I think this is all really just circling around the fact that patient testimony and patient stories are really, really critical to all of this. We do have a question. This is from Koa. Koa shared, many patients with chronic pain who need pain medication management face overwhelming stigma, especially during the current climate. How do we approach overcoming those challenges with legislators? So it's a very good question. Does anyone have any thoughts?
And stigma, I'm assuming he means, just a perception of somebody with a chronic disease in a negative way. And I really would encourage folks, to reach out in a way that makes you comfortable. Being outside of any comfort setting is going to make you feel like you're the target of bad looks. But I really do, encourage folks to overcome any nervousness or angst about it, because having legislators break through those stigma and actually meet an individual with a chronic disease and see them articulate how they're feeling and what the impact is, I think is how we make strides in better public policy making. George referenced right now, in the time of COVID, we're able to do much more remotely and via these virtual meetings. And there's also, at a slightest touch, an email or a letter that folks can write, right? You don't have to always be in person, but just making those communications baby steps at a time. Again, I just encourage folks to find the right kind of outreach that you're comfortable with, and then push yourself forward to break through any stigma that may exist. But I think legislators are definitely more open than they get credit for.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also just add that, and this is not a statistic that we want to see get higher, but I just literally read this yesterday on the new FDA guidance on vaccines, for example, that 60% of Americans have some chronic disease. So you're not alone in having a chronic disease. It's quite common. And when the majority of Americans, more than half, do have some sort of chronic condition. And so, I just encourage you, find your community, find strength in numbers, and work with others that have, your disease area, and others like CDC, which brings together people from multiple disease areas, and know that you're not alone in that, and help break that stigma, because, again, the mission of our organization is to elevate the patient voice, because the patient voice is so critical in the process. And, for our organization, we're patient-led. Our entire board is made up of patients, and we're guided by our membership and our annual membership survey to see what's most important to you. And so without patients, we wouldn't have the direction that we do. So we're very much thankful, not just dependent, but thankful and appreciative of what patients bring to the table for our work. So definitely know your value. And if you need it, I will tell you every day to remind you you are valued and your perspective matters. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. George, do you have anything to add or on that topic specifically?
No, I sort of agree with what everybody's saying. Sort of, perception is politics and stigma is real. And the way we can break through that is really patience. It's really your personal story of telling people, hey, you may have heard this. This is maybe what the perception is, but it's wrong. And I can tell you from a personal standpoint, here's why it's wrong, and sort of break that down. And I think the more legislators hear from patients from different chronic illness diseases, they start getting the fact that, like, hey, what I'm hearing or what I believe or have thought I believe actually isn't really true. And, we need to find a new, solution or a new path. But that is, I think, really the key of the value of having patients tell their stories and how they're impacted, and why it's important to be to be an advocate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'd add too that those become long-term relationships, right? Just as the lobbyists build relationships with lawmakers, so do citizens and residents. So if you go and testify one year, maybe for whatever reason you don't go back the next, but your legislator goes, God, I met with Koa. This seems like in that same area. Maybe I should touch base with her. I wonder what this does, or maybe you show up at a district event and just sort of keep in touch with them in a very light way, still makes you a resource, and it helps with stigma, right? And we've seen huge differences in lawmaking when we focus on stigma. Just think about the strides that mental health lobbying has had by pulling patient groups and families together with lawmakers. And that's why, those oftentimes those legislative session breaks, which, those of us who are lucky to live in places with part-time legislators are really great to take advantage of that, because that does help, you get them out of the stress of their day-to-day lawmaking life, and you can address some of those complex issues. So yes, I'm asking for your vote on SB, 560. And we want you to know that the community is struggling with this, and the more you're transparent about how it might affect different parts of the community, the more of a resource and more influential you can be as an individual. Because we can't pretend we speak for everybody, but we can say who we speak for and what that experience is, and that helps a lawmaker in a really practical way, in a long-term investment way.
Yeah, and one of the things I would also add too is if you come across a legislator or their staff, or you take the initiative, let them know that if they voted a particular way, which you agree with, like, thank them for that, particularly if the bill passed. They'll remember that, they'll appreciate, they'll know that it's impacted them, or it's impacted you as their constituent in a positive way, and that will keep them likely to keep that policy intact. So definitely, don't be afraid just to say thank you. You don't necessarily have any other reason. Just thank you for your support on that. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to pass it over to Mary Kay really quick, just to talk about some things specifically for how people here at the CDC can get involved, and then we'll do some closing remarks. But in the meantime, I'm going to pass it to Mary Kay. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll answer them. Mary Kay.
Great. Well, thank you. All the lobbyist panelists have been great about talking about working in coalitions. And of course, that is also what we do. And so I just wanted to mention a couple of things that we're working on and that we aim to help connect patients in your experience with lawmakers and with lobbyists and the people who are professional advocates on the ground. We just did a huge redo of our website, which a lot of you, if you were on the last webinar, last Chronic University, we did a little bit of a demo, but we've got our issues, some briefing information about them, ways that you can get involved, connection to Voter Voice, which is the easiest platform on earth to interact with your lawmakers. It'll make sure that your message gets to the right office. As George said, you can also look up your elected officials and certainly build bonds with your local folks to start out with. But you can also use voter voice for just a fairly quick, easy, succinct connection to lawmakers on policy. Sending a message right now, even if it's a short one, even if it's just a hello, I'm a constituent, I'm, struggling with this. And as we go into session, I wanted to make myself available as a resource. That is great. A note to any of the organizations that are similar to Kelly's or George's, where it's, where they do focus on patients and where it is disease specific, you can make that connection. And they'll also, I don't want to say hold your hand because that sounds diminutive, but sometimes we need our hands held when we're doing something new and somewhat scary, especially when we're doing something that seems really professionalized and really intense, as it is, that they are the best people to help us fit in the way that is going to make us effective and that is going to make us comfortable. So I think that is huge. So you can use our platform to educate yourself on any of those things, definitely connect with your local groups, and sign up for our newsletter is another way to stay connected. We do it about monthly, and we sort of summarize some of our policy issues. And this is also a plea as we head into fall is when we make our policy decisions, and other organizations do as well. Legislative sessions, especially in part-time states, will start in January. We're going to continue to use this as a platform to educate folks on how to learn about the issues. So there's the technical policy stuff, but also what to do about your feelings, your positions, and how to activate and how to get involved. So if you have questions, if you're curious about specific issues, please let us know. We really see education and activation as our best place to be and our best place to provide service to patients. And we want to hear from you. So let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like. Let us know what's easy. Let us know if there's other people who are doing work that you think is inspiring and interesting and that we could learn from. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. And if we come up with good stuff, we hope people follow us, because the more activated patients, the more activated citizens, yay, we win. So I will pause on that, but I know we want to hear last thoughts from all the panelists. If there's other things that you thought about or that you want patients and people to know about getting involved, we'd love to hear from you. I see that Kelly's unmuted, so I'm going to start with her.
Starting with me, I'm in the hot seat. Well, first I would just say thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel and to talk to y'all. I would say, there's tons of information and resources out there that sometimes in and of itself can be a bit intimidating, but I would say stay abreast of current events. Just read your local newspaper to be educated on topics. Reach out, find your legislators, as George mentioned early on, to identify who your members are. Look up organizations within your disease area in addition to CDC, and see if there's a community there to be a part of. There's organizations like mine for every disease topic, and get involved, and don't let them process intimidate you, because the process is very much dependent upon you. So sort of turn that around in your head, as make what maybe feel like a negative or an unsure thing and make it a positive, because you make the difference. And just recognize that even those of us who make a career out of lobbying and advocating, we all rely on each other as, to get, our jobs done. So it really is a community and its strength in numbers. And policy is always evolving. So it's even when we don't win on an issue one year, we just keep going and come back the next year, or vice versa. So there's always an opportunity to jump in. It's never too late.
Love it. Maria, George?
Yeah, I'll be quick because I think it's been such a great conversation. And so thank you again for hosting it. I hope it has inspired some folks. And just the closing message is one that's been said several times, is anybody can be an advocate. So I encourage everybody to advocate for their issues, because you really do matter, and it matters to the process.
Love that.
Yeah, I would say thank you as well. I mean, it's a great opportunity to talk about the profession. It's a profession that probably gets burned in effigy every week, just being sort of the big special interest group. But really, lobbyists, I tell career day at high schools and stuff. It's don't walk around with suitcases of cash and smoke cigars all day. We are really here to be navigators, but we're really navigators for patients and our clients, of saying, I can't do my job without people coming forward and being the real people who are testifying, the real people who are telling the stories, really connecting, legislators to the policy that they're working on, that these are the face behind it. And this is how it can benefit real Oregonians. So, I continue to encourage people to be involved and, participate in the process. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to testify. So someone sign me up, because I am just ready to go right now. But in all seriousness, thank you all so much. I know that I've learned a lot. I hope that everyone watching this either live or later learned something. Like Mary Kay mentioned, please make sure and sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media, get involved. I know Brian dropped a link to our website where you can learn about a bunch of different places where you can get involved. Our website is a really great resource to get started. So make sure you check all of those things out. Mary Kay, any last words from you?
No, just really thank you to the panelists for the work that you do every day to advocate for all of us, and for making time to illuminate that process. We appreciate it.
Yes, could not agree more. Yay! Well, thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate your time, and have a great Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you.